The Clouser Minnow, originally designed by Bob Clouser in the mid-'80s for smallmouth bass, has likely caught more species of fish than any other fly in existence. In designing the Clouser, Bob took the best attributes of a bucktail jig and worked them into a fly. The lead eyes, the key to this pattern, turn the fly over in the water so it rides hook point up and give it a jigging motion when it is stripped through the water. Because it rides hook point up, the Clouser is relatively snag-free. If you're interested in tying this fly, a recipe is in the description, along with a link to our website where you can find the materials. If you're not comfortable tying in lead eyes, working with bucktail, or adding flash to a fly, you might want to watch our basic videos on those topics. Start the thread, lay down a base for the eyes at the front of the hook, and trim the tag end. I'm going to tie the lead eyes in about 1/3 of the hook shank behind the eye of the hook. This will give me plenty of space to work in front of the eyes. The eyes should be tied in on the top of the hook, that is, on the side opposite the hook point. Secure the eyes with a series of figure-8 wraps. Wraps over the eyeball and under the hook shank, and cinching wraps between the eyeball and the hook, which are intended to further tighten your earlier wraps. Finish with locking wraps behind and in front of the eyes, followed by a half hitch. If you have trouble securing eyes to a hook, watch our video on tying in lead eyes. Next, you'll need a clump of white bucktail about the thickness of a No. 2 pencil lead when compressed. Gather a bundle of hair from the side of the tail and trim it off as close to the base as you can get. The hair from the middle of the tail up will be thinner and better for this pattern than the lower hairs. Hold the tips firmly and use a comb or your fingers to pull out the short hairs. These should be discarded. You'll need to even the tips up using a technique known as stacking. This can be done by hand by pulling out the hairs that are either too long or too short and placing them back in the bundle with the tips lined up, but using a hair stacker is much quicker. Place the hair tips down on the stacker. Use your fingers to move the hair around and break apart the bundle so the hairs move independently. Then, tap the stacker firmly on your tying bench to force the tips down to the bottom. You may have to repeat this process a couple times. When the tips are even, pull the stacker apart and remove the now stacked bundle. There are usually a few tips that still don't match. Just pull them out and discard them, or hand stack them back in with the bundle. Make sure your thread is in front of the eyes, then lay the bucktail along the hook shank with the butt ends toward the eye of the hook. The bundle will be tied in directly in front of the eyes. The length extending past the tie-in point should be 1.5 to 2 times the length of the hook shank. You can choose to either trim the butt ends before tying them in, or tie them in and trim them after. Either way works fine. I'll trim this bunch after it is tied in. Use the pinch to hold the hair in place while taking a loose wrap around the bucktail. Pull it tight while holding the bucktail firmly in place against the hook shank. Then add a few more wraps. Use your materials hand to gather the bucktail together again and pull it tight. Bring the thread back behind the eyes, crossing underneath, then over and around the bucktail, pulling it down to the hook shank just behind the eyes. I like to wrap the bucktail down towards the tail using open barber pole style wraps down and back. Make sure you don't use too much tension near the bend or you'll cause the bucktail to flare and the fly won't be as neat. Now that the bucktail is fully secured, it's time to trim the butt ends off. Pull the ends up at an angle and cut with the scissors parallel to the hook shank to cut a taper into the butt ends. Use the tips of your scissors to trim off any loose ends. Bring the thread up in front of the eyes and wrap the butt ends down. Just a few wraps will do it. You don't want to build up too much thread. Now flip the hook over so the point is up. Fold 3 or 4 strands of flashabou accent around the thread, slide them down to the hook, and wrap them down on the point side of the hook. Lay the flash back along the hook shank right down the center. Cut a clump of chartreuse bucktail, slightly thicker than the white bucktail you tied in earlier. Prepare it just like the last batch, and measure it against the hook shank so the tips are even with the white bucktail already on the hook. This time I'm going to trim the butt ends before tying them in. I'm using the pinch to precisely control where the thread goes, and I'm guiding the bucktail onto the hook as I tighten the thread. There's not much room to work with, so you have to be careful not to lose any of the hairs. The first couple wraps should be firm but not too tight. Work your way forward with increasing thread tension, binding down the butt ends. Trim off any stray ends. If there are any hairs that are out of place, you can trim them or just break them off. Continue wrapping to form a smooth thread head, making sure your wraps are tight. I like to work my way back towards the eyes and place a few relatively light wraps around the bucktail to help bundle it together. Then add a couple tight locking wraps and whip finish. Make sure you start your whip finish near the eyes to give yourself room to wrap forward. Trim the thread. Clean up any loose pieces. Then apply head cement. Start with the thread wraps as usual. You can increase the durability of the fly by also head cementing over the eyes and down the hook shank. Give the head cement a few minutes to dry, then remove the fly from the vise and distribute the top wing, the chartreuse bucktail, and the flash evenly on both sides of the hook. This fly is now ready to fish. The Clouser can be tied in whatever color or size you prefer, with different weights of eyes, for both fresh and saltwater species. You can also experiment with different wing material, both natural and synthetic. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe.